human-computer interaction. And Tovi has been a rock star in our field since when he was a grad student. And Tovi has published over 80 papers in top conferences and journals in HCI. And that was since 2001. And Tovi published his very first paper when he was in a junior year at undergrad student. That was very, very impressive. And Tovi has also received 9 Best Paper and Best Paper Nomination Award from the top conferences in our field, including ACM UIST and ACM CHI. And I started to know Tovi's work when I was an undergrad student, and I was amazed by many of Tovi's work. And there's one paper that I can never forget. It was published in UIST 2004. So in that paper, so Tovi described a number of techniques, interaction techniques, that using multi-finger just throw input to interact with the 3D objects in a volumetric display. So for those of you, if you do not know what a volumetric display is, basically it's a spinning screen. You can imagine that you display geometry on the screen and you spin it. You see it in a sort of a 3D dimension, right? So Tovi, one of the techniques Tovi proposed in that paper was use pinch gesture to zoom in, zoom out. Does that thing sound familiar? That is what we are using to zoom in, zoom out a photo on a tablet, on a smartphone, right? What makes it amazing was that paper was published in 2004. And back to that time, we don't see many touchscreen devices. And iPhone was not introduced until 3 years later, right? That was quite amazing. So one of my goals after I started my Ph.D. was to do an internship with Tovi at Autodesk. And I was lucky enough, I made it in 2010. And by that time, I had absolutely no idea of what research is about. Of course, I didn't tell Tovi. And my internship, the outcome of my internship was published at CHI 2011. And later in the second year, I was lucky enough, I went back to Autodesk and did a second internship with Tovi. So I consider myself extremely, extremely lucky to work with Tovi during my PhD training. And I learned a tremendous amount of stuff from two of my internships. And in my PhD dissertation, I have a section, basically I thank everyone, right? And that is true for everyone else, right? So in that section, I have this paragraph. I thank Tovi. This is what I wrote. I wrote, thank Tovi, who is one of my most respected researchers in the field, and Tovi has a significant influence on my standard of good research and how good research should be carried out. So again, today we are very lucky to have Tovi Grossman. Please join me in welcome Tovi.
Thank you, Jingdong, for that great introduction. It's a real pleasure for me to be here. As Jingdong mentioned, I'm from Autodesk Research in Toronto. This is my first time at Dartmouth University, but I do actually have a couple of connections to Dartmouth. As Jingdong mentioned, one of my top interns. Jingdong is very humble in how he introduces me, but I'd give a very similar introduction to himself. I was very lucky to work with XD on a couple of occasions. My other connection to Dartmouth is a bit more interesting. In high school, I played baseball. This is one of my teammates. I went on to play baseball at the University of Toronto. Sorry. This is Pat Naylor, who is the Dartmouth Teammate of the Year in 2004. So working at Autodesk is really interesting for me. For those who don't know about Autodesk, Autodesk's vision is to help people imagine, design, and create a better world. We make software for all different aspects of design, both in the 2D and 3D worlds. We have a fairly large software portfolio for doing this, both in consumer markets, architecture industry, design, and manufacturing. What's really exciting about Autodesk is basically any physical object or virtual 3D imagery you might see probably touched Autodesk software at one point within its design lifecycle. Which means doing research there gives us lots of incredible opportunities to impact the real world. So the Autodesk Research mission, and this is our newly launched research webpage, and I encourage you to go check it out, is to explore and create ideas, strategies, technologies, and partnerships to help Autodesk and its customers thrive. And of course, we do this through scientific research, being a research group. Here's some of the teams that work out of Autodesk Research. So I'm in the user interface research group, but we also have research in many areas of both computer science and beyond. So simulations and graphics, computational science, which is high performance computing and digital fabrication, but then areas such as bio and nano research and architecture simulation research as well that impact the Autodesk industry in different ways. And this is distributed across different parts of the world. So San Francisco is the main office for Autodesk. We're a company of about 8,000 people. The research group is closer to 100 people, with the majority being in Toronto and San Francisco. So the entirety of the user interface research team is in Toronto. The user interface research group consists of George Fitzmaurice, who is the director of UI research, and then myself, who helps manage the research program and the internship program that we do in the research group. And then Justin, Rubiet, Fraser, and Ben are all additional full-time research staff in the group. And we currently have one postdoc, Michelle. And as XD was mentioning, another important part of our research program is our internship program. And I've been very lucky to work with all of these great interns and more throughout my 6 or 7 years now that I've been at Autodesk Research. Our group has a number of different themes that we do, all within the realm of human-computer interaction. And I'll give you a brief overview of some of these topics that we work on, and then launch into a more specific talk after that. So with learning systems, we've been looking at how software learnability can be improved for complex software applications. So working at Autodesk, we put out a lot of powerful software, but also tools that are extremely complicated to use. And we've been doing a lot of research and making those software applications easier for new people and expert users to become more efficient with. We also do a lot of sort of core interaction and input technology research, looking at new UI technologies, such as augmented mirrors, multi-touch systems, mobile computing, and pen computing. A more recent line of research that we've been doing that's been led by Rubiet Habib-Ghazi is in dynamic illustrations. And with this, we're looking at bringing animation to the masses, making animations as easy as sketching on a piece of paper. And the Draco system you see there on the left has now been launched in beta for iPad. And actually, I'm very excited to talk to some people today that are already playing with it, and I encourage you to check it out if you haven't already. We also do work on interactive visualization, so visualizing large amounts of data. Often that's in the realm of improving software learnability, but also for doing things like video navigation and just general information visualization. And then finally, a recent topic we've been looking at is the use of wearable technologies and also the Internet of Things. And in this talk, I'm going to specifically focus on the first theme and the fifth theme, which might seem the two furthest apart, but they're actually quite related, and when you combine the two, you get some really interesting things that can happen, which I'll talk about today. So let's start with one of the seminal statements that was done in computer science, and more specifically, ubiquitous computing. This is Mark Weiser in 1991, who said the most profound technologies are those that disappear. They weave themselves into the fabric of everyday life until they are indistinguishable from it. And today we are accelerating faster than ever towards this future vision. And I'm going to talk about two specific technologies that are helping us achieve this. The first is wearable technology. And even today I've seen numerous people wearing Apple Watches. The Google Glass was more of an experiment, but certainly technology like that is coming, and it's coming very soon. In the academia, there's been a lot of research that has pushed this even further. So Ni et al. At WIST 2009 talked about disappearing mobile devices that are so small they have to be mounted onto the user's wrist. Or work by Harrison et al., who looked at displaying information and touching your hand as a means to interacting with digital and virtual content. Jingdong talked about work he did as an Autodesk Research intern. This is one of the most successful projects, I'd say, that was done out of our group, led by Jingdong, called the Magic Finger, where we looked at pushing this even further. What if the sensing of digital contact and digital content is embedded in your actual finger? And in doing this project, we looked at that exact question. So we used a camera that measured 1 millimeter by 1 millimeter and gave the human the capability to sense their surrounding environment and sense the textures that they are in contact with. And by doing this, we were inversing the typical relationship between humans and computers. Typically, it's the computer that senses us. And in this case, it was the human that's sensing the surrounding environment. And by exploring this design space, we were able to come up with a number of interesting gestural interactions and also contextual interactions, where you can perform specific tasks solely based on the type of material or texture or environment you were in when you were performing contact with different surfaces. And we developed some machine learning algorithms to sense the texture and with fairly good accuracy recognize what it is you were touching and also the direction of the swipe and that the contact actually existed. One of the things Jingdong was most excited about, he got to order a Star Trek shirt. So by touching the emblem on the Star Trek shirt, you could perform a specific function. We actually did it for data storage, so you could store a piece of data that was interesting to you. What we should have done was activate Siri, but because that's an opportunity we'll think about in the future. We also talked about the vision for Magic Finger, which again, in our research, was developed as a prototype. But thinking of how this could completely disappear or be integrated into the fabric of our life, and embedding some device that is so small it could go under your fingertip or potentially even implanted in your skin. And this idea of implanted user interfaces is something we've taken even further. In CHI 2012, we wrote a paper on implanted user interfaces. Now, a subject that might be a little bit uncomfortable, but it's actually a topic that's already arrived. When you think about a scene like this, and go back to Weiser's seminal vision about technology disappearing, you might not look at the scene and think people are wearing technology on their bodies or have it implanted. But there could be someone in the back wearing a hearing aid, or someone else wearing a pacemaker. So implanted technologies are clearly here already. They're very commonly used. And what we wanted to explore is there an opportunity to provide user interfaces to those implanted devices? And we did this in two ways. We simulated implanted devices by generating our own artificial skin, and we had an electronic device under that piece of skin that we sent a user around the city to do some typical tasks like ordering a cup of coffee or riding the bus, getting the newspaper. All at the same time, this device was actuating, so it might vibrate, a sound might come out, or it might light up, and the user had to respond with a specific interaction based on the type of output that was coming out. And that was just to gather experiences of what it would be like to walk around with an interface that was implanted under your skin. Pushing the boundary even further, we actually implemented implanted user interfaces. So we developed a suite of UI technologies that were small enough that they could be implanted under the skin, and in collaboration with the Department of Anatomy at University of Toronto, we actually implanted these devices under a specimen arm. This is what a LED looks like when it's illuminated under human skin. And we did a theoretical evaluation of what performance would be provided by these different UI elements when implanted in comparison to when used in typical environment settings. And all this research is pointing to something really interesting. So from what I hear, there's some people in here taking a HCI course. It sounds like they were forced to, or they'd give some course credit. But I do appreciate your attendance in the talk. Every human-computer interface up until now has had three common components. This is a book written in 1983, and it's one of the seminal resources for human-computer interaction research. So what are those three common components that every such system has? Well, if you look at the image, there's a computer, there's a human, and there's interface. Yeah, I'm not sure the human's actually a human in this picture. I'm not sure what that is. And that's been true since the original user interfaces up until today. Even with more modern technologies, those three components are still there. We have the human, we have the computer, which is a lot smaller, but it's still there, and we have the interface to communicate with it. But what's happening with these technologies, where we now have wearable devices, or devices that are embedded on our skin or even under our skin? This changes things. Now we have a computer, but we have a human interface. These components are not separated anymore. So our level of connection with our digital worlds has become closer than ever. Here's one example where we exploited that quite recently. This was done last year at the ACM CHI conference. Being in a company that does design software, we thought, well, if humans can be the interface, could they be the interface for design? And we developed a system where your own skin and your own body was the design canvas for doing 3D modeling. So we had a Kinect system that was recognizing the movements of your finger and also the location and geometry of your arm. And you could design 3D models using different parametric modeling systems. And once done, you can actually fabricate the 3D models. And so in this case, the user designed a bracelet that could house a smartwatch, so a custom smartwatch. And it's guaranteed to fit because it was designed on your arm. So that's wearable technology. This is an illustration of a magazine article that was written recently about where wearable technology is going. And a lot of these are not too far off in the future, such as digital fabric, or elements in your shoes that can house GPS, or create power for all your other digital devices, or even embedded sensors that are under the skin if you see the highlight of the hand. All these areas are areas that are being worked on actively by researchers. And we are more and more moving towards a trend of realizing this. So the second technology I want to talk about that's putting us closer to this seminal vision of technology disappearing into our everyday lives is the Internet of Things. Sometimes it's seen as a buzzword, and that's because of products like this. So in case you wanted to get a text message every time your cat goes pee, you can buy this product here. Internet of Things is kind of this weird thing because it does have this sort of negative connotation of just being buzz and not too much practical use. But the Internet of Things is definitely more than just smart consumer products. It's the idea of every product out there, every object being all connected. And it's more about products and individual objects, but it's also about infrastructure. So things like power or transportation or building maintenance, things like that. Having all of these environments instrumented and connected opens up a lot of opportunities. And the word I like there is connected. Everything is becoming connected. So we can become connected to our personal possessions and have an awareness of where they are at all times. Become connected to our valuable possessions, such as the smart bike lock. Even our children, we are becoming more connected with. And some might see this as a dystopian future, but this is a reality, and this is coming of us having an awareness of where our friends, our family are at all times. So with the Internet of Things, we have become a connected society. And this complements the wearable technologies, which has made us an instrumented society. When we take these two things together, we get something quite interesting. So going back to Star Trek, anyone think of what this might remind them of being both instrumented and connected? Borg. So for those who were fans of Star Trek, this is the Borg. And on the right is the ship that they flew around in. But they are also connected by something called the collective. So every board was instrumented with this wearable and implanted technology, and each member of the race was connected to each other member. And they were connected in terms of their knowledge, but in terms of their tasks, what they were doing. This is a pretty scary future. I don't think we're heading this way, but it's an interesting contrast to make. So the Borg were a fictional race. Humans were non-fictional. Borg, cybernetic organisms. We're getting pretty close. Here's where the similarity is actually, it's pretty close. The Borg were connected by what was called the collective, or also called the hive mind. And humans, we're now pretty much connected both by the Internet of Things, but also social media and our mobile devices. Here's where hopefully we diverge. If you ever watch Star Trek, the Borg were not a very friendly race. Their mission was to assimilate all other species by violent injection. And today, really what the purpose of my talk is to talk about where I think we can leverage both the Internet of Things and wearables. And the purpose we're going to be looking at is how we can use it for learning and performance of physical tasks. And this is how we'll be relating to the work we've done in software learnability. So this combination of technologies could possibly lead to a new revolution in education. If we look at the history of education, well, classroom education is obviously the status quo and the traditional means of providing education. More recently, we've seen explosion in online coursework and education systems. And then what I see is this new trend, possibility, is what I'd call just-in-time education, or just-in-time learning, where you don't get formal training or learning, but you can learn on the spot by leveraging maybe the knowledge of some central system or leveraging the knowledge of other people. Because we are so connected and instrumented, we have that power to connect that knowledge. And I'm not saying this is going to replace either of those other two forms of education, but it's something that can complement it. So if you've seen The Matrix, you probably remember this statement, I know Kung Fu. This is a perfect example, but to the extreme, of just-in-time education or just-in-time learning. Where if you were in The Matrix, at any point in time, if you needed to acquire knowledge, you can call up the operator and say, hey, I need to fly this helicopter, or I need to learn this martial art, and instantly they would upload that information to your brain. So this would be to the absolute extreme. We're not going to achieve that anytime soon. But we can sort of leverage on this concept. I'm going to show some fairly inspiring work done by other groups, showing this isn't about just acquiring knowledge, but it's about acquiring physical skills. The one on the left is work by Sodi et al. At Microsoft Research, where they're providing visual guidance on the context of your actual body. And this is for learning either physical movements or gestures that need to be performed. And then on the right is work by Henderson and Feiner, where they're looking at how to help people assemble mechanical parts. And this is using an augmented reality system, so you wear a head-mounted system that could provide visual overlays. And again, both of these are really great examples of how technology can be leveraged to assist with the learning and completion of physical tasks. Let's contrast this to typical approaches to learning. Anyone know this guy?
Bob Ross.
Bob Ross, yeah. So Bob Ross had a TV program where he would teach people to paint, which is actually compelling and useful if you were an artist. But it could also be very frustrating, because you just might not have the skill to recreate what he was doing, and you certainly wouldn't get feedback from him if you were doing something wrong. Or even worse, if you don't even have Bob Ross to watch, but you have a standard drawing textbook. This might be step one, looks easy enough. So this is a great example of a physical skill, a physical task, where traditional means we don't have that type of guidance and feedback that's similar to an expert sitting beside us that can be helping us. Let's go back to my passion for baseball. Here's someone who's uploaded this video up to YouTube of him training with this hitting device. I was a pitcher, so I'm not going to make too many comments on his hitting mechanics, but they're not perfect. What he's doing is great. He's improving his strength, he's improving his hand-eye coordination, but I'd argue he's not improving his swing. In fact, if anything, his swing's going to get worse, because his bad habits are just going to keep repeating on themselves. He's getting absolutely zero feedback from the system about what he's doing wrong and how to improve it. What he needs is the Honorable Sensei Miyagi. So, if you grew up in the 80s, you probably remember wax on, wax off. Mr. Miyagi was teaching Daniel how to do all of these different physical tasks. Of course, the end purpose was so he can learn karate. But what's really interesting here is looking at the different techniques Mr. Miyagi is using to teach Daniel. Where he's showing them the tools to use, he's showing them the location to perform the actions. He's doing demonstration, but he's also doing correction. And through all that interaction, Daniel learns to master the skill. And eventually, once he knows everything, he can learn on his own, but he does need that expert there with him to help him along the way. And so this is the type of experience that we wanted to replicate. And like I said earlier, initially we were doing this in the realm of software applications. So just to give you some brief examples of how we can connect knowledge, this is again in the software realm. This is a system we developed called Community Commands, where people using AutoCAD, which has thousands of commands, uploaded their data of how they were using the system to a central system that we monitored. And we applied a recommender system similar to what Amazon or Netflix would use, where you can compare the usage patterns of one user to the usage pattern of the community. And you can quickly identify and fairly accurately identify commands that user is just not aware of, that are quite relevant to the type of work that that user is doing. And so those commands are fed back to the active user, and then those usage patterns are subsequently fed back into the system. Another interesting example of how we sort of leverage connected knowledge to improve performance and efficiency was we developed this system called Cadiment. It was an online game you could play to learn AutoCAD, where you'd get a screen, something like on the left, where you perform a task, but you'd also have the opportunity to view the video of someone else that was performing the task. If you've ever played online games, often it's an interesting thing happening, is that you're playing and you're trying to learn and become a better player, but you're also at the same time observing what other people are doing. And you have the opportunity to learn their strategies because you directly observe it. When we use software, we often don't have that experience, unless we explicitly go to YouTube and watch tutorials. So with Cadiment, you would play a level, but then you'd have the opportunity to view a video of your opponent and see what they did. We ran an interesting study where we brought 8 people in. None of them had any experience with AutoCAD, but we took 4 of those people and we gave them 15 minutes of training. The other 4 people were left completely in the dark. This is their performance at the end of the study. So with the Cadiment system, the people who received no training, just through playing the game and observing other people, were able to exceed the performance of the people who had the training at the beginning. Where in the baseline system, where you didn't have the opportunity to view your peers, you'd get the data that you would expect. So what was happening was, over time, our system was pairing one player to the next player in a way that we'd always try to pair you to someone who was a similar skill level, but a little better on previous levels. And by doing that, what this image is showing is the dark blue line is the progression of skill for each individual player, so the 4 individual players that were untrained. And the red dots show the performance of the person they were matched up with. And eventually they get an opportunity to see someone who is really excelling at the game. And you can see the blue lines converge to the top, showing that they pick up these skills by the end of the task. So a really nice example of how we can use connected knowledge to improve efficiency. But again, we wanted to go further and look at this for physical tasks. Here's 2 examples of that. And 2 of the examples that relate to some of the prior examples I was showing, both with sketching and with physical movements. So Sketch Revolution was a tutorial system that allowed people to recreate artistic work that were done by expert artists. But throughout the entire system, they were getting feedback and guidance about how to perform the task and correction. So if they did something wrong, their stroke would actually be corrected, so they get the visual artwork that they wanted. On the right is a system we developed called UMove, and that was for learning physical movements such as martial arts, dancing, or swinging a baseball bat. We developed an augmented mirror system where you would see your own reflection, but we'd also project onto the mirror, so you would see a mapping of your own skeleton onto your body, but we'd also project the skeleton of an expert user who maybe performed that ballet movement, and you could match up your skeleton to that of the expert. And we had a progression system, so first you learned static poses, but then you could learn the fluidity of the movement. So after doing these two initial projects on pushing learnability into the physical realm, we wanted to look at how it could be applied into tasks relevant to the design, making, and construction industries. And I'm going to talk about two projects that are in this realm. The first was called the Smart Makerspace, a project that we completed recently, where we built a mock makerspace within our research lab that had a workbench, it had a toolbox on the left, it had a bunch of smart tools on the right. And when I say smart tools, I mean we implemented sensors on those tools so it could recognize how they were actually being used. The idea of the Smart Makerspace is we would provide a tutorial for the user to complete some sort of task. And the task we used was you had to build a physical box and solder on a depth sensor and an LED, and the LED would go on when your finger came close to the box. Now, if I was a novice user, didn't have experience with the tools or the materials that I was using, I might really struggle with this. And we wanted to, again, get close to that experience of having an expert work with you. We did this in a couple ways. One, as I was saying, we instrumented all the tools with sensors, so we can understand if you were picking up the right tool, if you had that tool in the right setting. And we also had a smart toolbox that would guide you to the correct tools that you needed for any individual step. I'll show a quick video that demonstrates the system.
The space is based around an 84-inch smart workbench, toolbox, and power tools. The workbench includes a work and tool area, a manual with buttons for navigation, an overview to encourage a wider understanding of the task, a custom parts area that labels and highlights relevant pieces, and a tool space complete with smart power tools that highlights a required tool and feeds back on their current state and usage. The workspace also provides videos of previous makers conducting the relevant step and tool clips to encourage safe tool usage. Finally, the table provides safety alerts and usage prompts, including aware audio that compensates for any tools being used. The system can remind makers to wear smart safety glasses and prompt them when using a tool incorrectly. Next to the table there is a smart toolbox with step-relevant LEDs that guide users towards the correct buckets.
So it was an interesting project to do, and we ran users through the task and found it to be useful for a number of different purposes. But if we wanted to take this to the next step, for example, help out these construction workers while they're performing the task, we needed some different solutions. First of all, obviously the guy on the roof is not going to have an 80-inch display up there with him. But second of all, there's multiple people working on this project now. So it's not just about being mobile, but it's also about being distributed and coordinating the activity of multiple people. So I'm going to talk about a recent project that we just completed that touches upon some of these themes. It was called The Hive, and it was done at an Autodesk convention just recently. And it was a fairly large collaboration, the biggest project I've ever been involved in. We worked with a couple of different groups at Autodesk. One is a research lab in the San Francisco office that specializes in robots. ICD is a lab within a university in Germany that does robotic fabrication, and the Living is a computational architecture team. The goal of the project was to have attendees of the actual conference build this, which is a 12-foot pavilion structure. You can see there's a person in the back there. There's a doorway at the front and the back, so this is a functional architectural pavilion. And so we wanted people to be able to come together and build this without any prior knowledge or task skill. We were going to do this leveraging the two technologies that I've been talking about, wearables and the Internet of Things. So I'll talk a bit about the structure first, and then tell you how we got people with no knowledge to actually build it. So the base material was bamboo, which is actually a traditional architectural material. It's both lightweight and versatile and very strong, and used for many different purposes, including scaffolding. And the structure was built out of a series of individual parts. The parts are called tensegrity units. You basically take 3 bamboo sticks, and you tie thread around it. And by winding the thread, you form tension between the sticks. And so the 3 sticks aren't actually attached, and in many cases they aren't even in contact with one another. It's just the tension of the string between all the endpoints that hold it together. Now, fabricating something like this manually is extremely difficult, because if you try to hold 2 sticks, you can't hold the 3rd one, and then adding all the tension needs to be done instantly or they'll fall off. So that's where the robotics come in. And you can think of this as sort of an on-site fabrication machine that was used for the building of the structure. So at the actual exhibit, we had 4 robots set up that would allow the human users to load the sticks onto the robotic system and fabricate this tensegrity unit. And then the other challenge with the task is, how do you build a 12-foot high pavilion while still maintaining some level of safety for the attendees who are helping out? And so we used this sort of top-down approach where the entire pavilion structure was being hoisted from the ceiling. So you'd build the top row, it would lift up gradually, you'd build the next row until you had the entire structure built. And then the challenging aspect of this project, and what made it interesting from our perspective, was that it was going to be done by attendees of the conference, who again won't have the necessary task knowledge of how to build this. So that's where the wearable devices came in, and what we did was use the Apple smartwatches as your personal assistant throughout the exhibit, helping you know where to go, where to pick up your materials, what materials you need, what to do with them, and how to eventually add your part that you created to the final structure. So the smartwatch included a number of different types of instructions and images and prompts to help you along the way, screens like this. We actually played around a lot with the mechanism for providing instructions. We looked at using video on the Apple Watch as well, and eventually converged on this design where we have very short instructions that you can flip from one to the next, and images that you can tap on to get to full screen. So they're still a little bit small, but sufficient for the type of instructions we were trying to provide. Another aspect of the system was we wanted to be able to track where people were to make sure we were giving them the right instruction at the right step of the time. So often people were asked to go to a specific station. This is an early rendering of the exhibit. And we used iBeacons deployed throughout the system to provide 2D location tracking. We didn't get exact 2D location, but we could at least detect when people arrived to stations. So here's some markup showing where we deployed the iBeacons. And we developed an algorithm where we basically filtered out the signals and then detected if your minimum distance to any specific iBeacon was closer than the distance measured to any of the other iBeacons, and that would trigger an event that said, yes, this user has arrived at this station. The other IoT device that we used in this exhibit was the actual connector nodes that were used for the structure. So this is a connector node. It's a piece of steel that provides the structural support. But then there's that chip underneath it with some plexiglass on top that provides a visual cue for the users throughout the exhibit. And so those chips are using something called ANT wireless. It's Bluetooth low energy. And we can actuate any connector node in the system. There are about 300 of these in the entire exhibit. And we could use it to help people arrive at specific locations, so we could blink them if we needed someone to go to a specific spot. But we also used it to help people build the actual structure. So when someone had to, grab a couple of nodes, we would blink them and you know those are the two that you needed to grab. And we can change the colors of them. So when it came to the time of adding your part to the structure, we could actually illuminate the parts of the structure that you needed to add your part to, and not only get the location right, but get the orientation right. The structure was designed with this computational design by an architecture team. So if you added your part to the wrong spot, the entire structure would eventually fail. It would collapse in on itself. So this is a really interesting concept of not just deploying IoT, but deploying IoT that's integrated into the actual building that is being created. The other nice thing about having the LEDs in the actual structure is that we could do these cool light shows at the end of the exhibit. It was also a great distraction anytime something went wrong. We could just play the light show and people would focus on it. So to make this all work, we needed a central engine, what we called the Foreman engine, that could track everything that was going on in the exhibit. This is a back-end system that's basically tracking who's logged into the system. We allowed 4 people to be in the exhibit building at any given time. What stage they're on, which robot they're assigned to, what stage the robot is on, and then at the bottom right there you see the buildup of the structure, which parts have been added, which parts still need to be added. So it's this back-end intelligent agent that's coordinating all the activity that's occurring within the exhibit. This is the front-end representation of the Foreman engine. We basically see the same type of information, but in a more consumable way. And it allowed attendees of the exhibit to check up on how the status of the project was going and what was happening at any given time within the 3-day exhibit. So the structure was designed to be built across a 3-day period. We completed it just halfway through the 3rd day, which was our goal, and then we were able to open up the exhibit and anyone could go in and walk through the pavilion and experience it. Here's a quick video showing the experience. And here are a couple of photos from the exhibit. So it was a really amazing experience to do this real high-level project. On the top left, that's where the participants picked up their nodes. If you saw in the video, there were people wearing red vests. Autodesk Safety found out about what we were doing and decided they wanted someone there at all times, so we had people monitoring what was going on, but the participants, for the most part, were quite independent with the actual building of the structure. The interface to the robots, which you see at the bottom right, was actually through the smartwatch. So you would load your materials, and then you'd actually click a button on the smartwatch that would tell the robot that you were ready for the next step, and it would wind the thread onto the part. Just talking about the level of collaboration, on the left are most of the members of the research team that developed the exhibit, and then on the right there, that's just our user interface research group that all had a hand in developing the project. And then a lot of people asked us what we did with the pavilion once it was finished. It's a bit of a sad story. We took it apart. That's Danielle, our head architect, that designed the pavilion, and basically one snip at a time took the structure apart. And they've preserved a 3x4 grid of the nodes. Just talking quickly about some of the implications of of the work. We're already seeing some of these types of ideas being deployed in the real world. This is a system that can monitor construction sites, so can monitor both the status of a construction, but also the specific status of what construction workers are doing using drones with video cameras mounted on them. So in this case, there's no sort of interface to help make things more efficient, but it can help recognize where there might be problems occurring or where there might be inefficiencies in the practice. But what I really like to do is think about ways where we can make systems like this more efficient. How we can deploy the technologies that I've talked about into settings like this. Now, an interesting thing here is you most likely don't have unskilled workers, working on a project like this. However, you do typically, within a construction team, have people that are more junior or might still be learning, so technology could be useful there. We had a close to failure happening with our pavilion exhibit that we did, where we realized about 1/3 into the way of the build that our robot server was truncating 2-digit numbers into 1-digit numbers. So we actually had to take apart a good chunk of the exhibit on the second evening. And so there was a bunch of us from the research team that had to rebuild everything. And what we found was it was really useful to have this Foreman engine and have the wearable technology. It wasn't just for show, and it wasn't just for novice users. It was extremely useful to be guided to where we needed to go, what we needed to do. So this is not just technology for people in the learning stage. These types of technologies would be extremely useful for experts as well. But talking about novices, there's situations like this. This is an image of Habitat for Humanity workers, where you have a bunch of people coming together to do something extremely useful, but may not necessarily have all the skills required. Plus, they need to be coordinated. And that's a huge task and something that could be extremely useful. Similarly, for volunteer opportunities abroad, for disaster relief, or school rebuilding, things like that, where you have both local and abroad workers, you could be able to coordinate their activities and give them the knowledge just in time for them to complete the task. So I'll conclude with the takeaway message. Wiser's vision is becoming reality. Wearables and IoT are making us instrumented and connected. This opens the door to just-in-time learning, which can provide expert guidance and feedback for physical tasks. And I hope some of the research I've shown today has shown how we can advance these ideas and make them closer and closer to things that could be helping out in our everyday lives. With that, I'll conclude and take any questions. Thank you.
Questions?
Have you done any work or thought about what the implications are to the person that's doing the building to be guided with that kind of specificity in their actions? Not just the learner, but the professional. Is it something that they enjoy doing more or they enjoy doing less?
Yeah, so it's an interesting topic, and that's come up in a couple of projects that I've shown. So initially, the Smart Makerspace project I've shown. One of the aspects of the making movement is the ability to be creative. And so if you get into a workshop and you're told do this, 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 and this, absolutely that's going to be a detrimental experience. So in a task where you're there to be creative and potentially to innovate and to explore, for sure you don't want to be guided every step of the way, and we did get feedback like that and are very aware of that. That being said, if there's a situation where you're, for example, using a saw and you forgot to put on your safety glasses, that's an opportunity where you could prompt someone and give them a reminder. So I think what we're proposing isn't to provide that, step by step, this is what you need to do, but explore ways where we can be helpful and, look at that trade-off between efficiency and, welcoming from behalf of the person that's using it. Like I said, when us as the experts were building the system and using the technology, it was extremely useful, but that's a scenario where it is very specific what our task was doing. So there's definitely an interesting balance and trade-off. And we only know as much as what we've deployed. If we ever get to the point where we're doing this for home building or construction tasks, certainly an issue that'll be interesting to look at. Yeah, thanks.
It seems like one of the hurdles for actually using this in construction type tasks would be that it's going to be a lot more expensive to use anything similar to the technique you used at the conference. What ways do you have in mind to reduce the cost of this type of a system?
Yeah, definitely a big issue, especially a system like what I showed for Habitat for Humanity, where this is supposed to be doing volunteers, saving money. So you can't inject a system that's now more expensive. So I guess the response to that is first of all, technology is getting cheaper and cheaper. So that's one thing we have is just wait for that cost-benefit trade-off to be profitable. In terms of like how you form that balance, when we did the exhibit, we had the luxury of being able to go over the top because it was a research project. Let's do everything possible to make this as functional as we can. But you could certainly think about what were those the key elements that we had that really performed best throughout the exhibit, and we're actually still going through a lot of the observations we took, and we're doing questionnaires with people. So I think doing an initial deployment that might be more expensive, but then identifying those key elements that provide that most benefit could help certainly reduce costs.
Yeah, I was remembering your recommender system. So it would take the actions of many novice users and give them recommendations about what actions they might use, what commands they might use next. A lot of people make the same mistakes. So how does your system know not to just recommend the same mistakes that all the other people have done before? Does it have a sense of what's the right command or the better path to take?
Yeah, it was sort of, you can say the same thing about like Netflix, for example. A lot of people have bad taste in movies, right? So just leveraging that exact same technology, hoping it sort of sorts itself out, because we're not comparing you as a novice to all other novices. We're comparing you to the entire community and finding the usage patterns that you most closely map to, and find the few number of commands that the people who are most similar to you are commonly using, but you haven't tried a single time.
So those would be other novices who are also making
True.
mistakes.
Yeah, and so what we did was we deployed the system for a term of 3 months and looked at adoption rates. And for sure, we identified areas where a command was recommended and a person tried it once and they never used it again. No harm done. But we're pretty certain they'd never been exposed to that command. At least they've gotten an awareness of what it is and what it's done. In addition, we found many cases where a command was recommended, they used it and then they adopted it and continued using it. So at that point, we're not with the recommender system. The goal was to increase awareness of what was available, not necessarily spell out here's a workflow you need to use and it'll be better. But yeah, for sure, I think a lot of times when we get help, we're too reliant on it. We think this is probably written by some expert who knows what's best. So there is that trade-off that you need to be aware of.
We have time for one more question.
I'd be interested in your thought of the dystopian future thing, right? So one can envision this happening with every task eventually, right? And then pretty soon the Department of Health in Washington D.C. decide this is how everybody's going to brush their teeth. And then how you brushed your teeth this morning goes into your social score, right, or whatever. Do you guys talk about that stuff a lot? What's the sort of vibe over there?
Yeah, we think about it a lot. I definitely don't do research in that area, so my thoughts are based on sort of the technology I've been exposed to and the themes I see emerging. So don't put too much into what I'll say, but I think society changes extremely quickly. It's pretty amazing to see, even in the last 10 or 15 years. Like 15 years ago, if I told you I'm going to post pictures of my kids in places that everyone in the world could see, you'd probably think I was crazy, right? And now it's pretty common. And our views of security and privacy are changing dramatically as well. I think there's there's cases now where people prefer to be on camera at all times, so there's more accountability, which contrasts pretty dramatically common viewpoints from, again, 10 or 20 years ago. So I don't know where we're going with this. I mean, I think, you know, the image I showed of those GPS systems that are being developed for children is one of the most interesting ones, because, you know, as a parent, who wouldn't want to know where your child is? But at the same time, do we really want to go there where, you know, every kid is being strapped with a wristband that allows us to know where they are? I think what you're talking about goes a little bit further, where is that information going and where is it stored? And that's where you get into a really slippery slope. If all this information is accessible by some, you know, central organization or system. Yeah. Just a couple thoughts on yeah, any other comments?
All right. If you don't have any more questions, let's thank our speaker.